Hey team, welcome to episode 139 of Transition Talk, where we talk about dental transitions and how to navigate the sometimes messy path to practice ownership. If you're a longtime listener, you know that we typically root for a practice acquisition over a startup because of, well, cash. However, we know there are times when a startup just makes sense, or maybe you are just entrepreneurial and that's what you want to do. We want to supply you with the knowledge and tools to help you along your path to ownership, regardless of if it's a startup or an acquisition. Today, we're going to focus on startups for dental specialties and how they align or differ from general practice startups. But before we dive in...
Hi, Miss Radcliffe.
Hello. How are you?
I am doing excellent in preparation because, I was preparing for this episode. Last night in bed with the beautiful Roxanne, I'm listening to episode 15. It has been 6 years ago that we recorded.
So long.
And to see all the notes that you took to prepare us for that meeting, it has been just ages. And so I thought it'd be fun for us to go back and look at where we were, just kind of personally, kids and things like that. A little short story of where you were 6 years ago.
Ooh. That is a long time. Okay, so it was pre-COVID.
Yes.
So crazy. Lila, she's 15 now, so she was 9. And Bryn is 10, so she was 4. So babies in the throw of parenting 2 single-digit age kids, which feels so crazy now. I was doing all of our podcasts. We didn't have Joellen. So from a work perspective, every Tuesday night, I was panicked, and we were releasing every week, I think, or every other week. And so I was frantically editing and writing things and making sure they were posted, which is insane. Thank you, Joellen. And I was only managing 1 company. And now
you're managing
3?
everything.
I don't think that's true. But 3. And our team was much smaller. And so, a whole different world. I kind of feel like after you have 1 child, you're I don't know what I did with all this free time. Well, now I'm looking back and I'm like, man, what did I do with all that free time I had back 6 years ago?
Well, you were prepping a lot because you had 3 pages of your episode 15. Now Charles is prepping for some of this, the
Charles
night before.
Charles is prepping a little more than me. What about you 6 years ago?
Well, so Cole was 19, just graduated high school. Bella was about ready to be a senior. And back then, I was managing children. They are not children anymore. These are grown adults. And now I have to put my therapy hat on. My son now, he just got a real job while he's getting his master's in psychology. He's actually going to be working at the prison.
Oh my gosh.
And then he'll be counseling X number of hours with inmates.
I love it.
Felons. And my daughter has a business plan. She's moving to New York.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yes. So these are adult, oh my God, kind of management problems that I'm dealing with.
Oh my goodness.
And trying to guide them and coach them and say all the right things. And so, and I just got married to Roxanne. So just kind of feel like I'm figuring that part out, Yes,
finally
ma'am.
Getting there.
Yeah. She's always right and I'm always wrong, and bite your lip. And been happy. No, I'm teasing. I'm teaching her how to bite her lip every once in a while, but it's not working out. But no, it is. Time flies, and to see. It's not necessarily business-wise. I think when you look at it from a perspective of a parent and where the kids are, it's a big difference.
Feels like a lot of work.
Yeah.
Got us here.
Yeah.
That's why we don't remember how long it's been. Yeah, I agree. And we have done 120-something episodes since then, which is also crazy. So we've talked about this topic a few times. So like you said, episode 15, all about that startup. It was all about that bass. Do you remember that song by Meghan Trainor?
Oh, yes.
That's where I got the title for that episode.
Yeah.
I remember it.
Thank you for that.
I hear it in my head. And we were just podcast babies. Today's episode is a little bit of an update on some of that content because it was 6 years ago and things have changed a little bit. And so we're going to kind of chat about that. We had episode 63. We did an interview with Dr. Gabe Duncan, and he had a great startup and a great experience. And so that was fun to kind of hear his story. And then we did another one, episode 74, about just kind of tips and resources. And that one's still a great listen to. All of them are great listens, but that one is still great. And then we did kind of a building episode, and we'll kind of touch on kind of how that relates to the various types of startups that we're going to talk about today. And we'll also talk a little bit more about specialty. We focused historically a lot more on the general startup. So you're going to give us all of your knowledge on specialty startups.
Yes, I can't
You
wait, Christy.
cannot wait.
Can't wait.
So you're going to talk a lot today. So are you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So like we do in every episode, I think it's important that we start with like the why. And so I think if you are thinking about a startup, I think it's always important. And our first question will be why? And I think understanding kind of the economics of a dental practice is really important if you're going to go on this journey, whether you're going to acquire or whether you're going to do a startup. But let's give everyone a refresher on kind of that basics of a dental practice from a financial standpoint.
Is it economics? Economics. What?
Economics.
I think I put too much emphasis on the E.
On the syllables. I'm back
goodness.
on target.
Okay. So the economics of the dental practice. So it's just like it's super important to understand, like fast forward from 6 years ago, the borrowing is a massive number. You go back and look to see like even interest rates for how much you borrowed. That's changed. We have interest rates in this environment that have changed. But many, many years ago, you were doing a GP startup and maybe it was 500, 550. And I'm seeing numbers 725, 750. And these are lease space build outs. And these are 3-4 equipment op finish out practices. This is not like something 3,000, 4,000 square feet. These are nice 2,000 square foot. It's just expensive today. So when I listened back to episode 15, I spoke so fast. It was incredible. Note to Charles, slow down. And I didn't understand myself, so it was quite entertaining to listen to myself, which I hate doing. But big picture, the economics of a dental practice, the first 500,000 of collections in any business, if it's a GP or a perio or ortho, you're just not making much money. And it has to do with patients. And so it's not until you start hitting these numbers of $8-9 million of collections to when they actually become profitable. And in the end, that's what we're looking to do. If we are going to make this huge investment, $700,000-800,000 to purchase a startup with 0 patients, and we're going to have to work part-time at these other locations. We're signing a lease that is essentially $7,000-9,000 a month, or another $100,000 a year, another $1 million of liabilities. This is a major task. And so to see it from the early stages of no patients to know that at 500 collections, you're going to make maybe $100,000 a year, to at 7, 8, and 9, it's at the point, it's a tipping point around the $1 million of collections that we should start to see some type of profitability in the practice, generally in that 35 to 40%. In other words, now that we're finally at $1 million, we will make around 300, 325, 350, as much as 400. It will depend on some of the economics of the practice, like what was that rent, and certainly team, lab, and supplies.
And that's before you pay the debt.
Before you pay the debt, that's before you pay yourself, any perks, discretionary things like that, of course. So very good point for someone who looks at financial statements all day. So it's important. And I think leaning on these other episodes and some of these resources and tools that we have as far as the checklist and people to kind of assemble this, getting other success stories from other GP startups, I think is absolutely critical. The only thing it gives me anxiety, I met a couple here in the last 2 weeks, husband and wife duo. They used a well-known consulting company and they did a startup, and it's here in the Dallas area, and we're 3 years in and they're 400,000 of collections, and they're looking at me asking for advice, and I don't have the advice. The advice is you need to somehow solve your new patient flow. The new patient flow is the problem. And so the math of the economics of these practices are, if you can somehow get your new patient flow up to 50, 60, 70 new patients a month, you're going to be like Gabe Duncan in episode 63. You're going to do almost $1 million of collections in your first year, because it is a active patient number that we're trying to get to. Most $1 million practices will have about 1,500 active patients. And so Gabe was able to hit these incredible numbers, but it was only because he had 60, 70, 80 new patients a month and doing a ton of restorative work out of the gate. And so it's a very unique, very awesome success story. And that's why he was interviewed. For most people, it's going to be like this couple that I met here in Dallas are a little bit struggling. So it's just a quick recap on the economics. First 500 is going to be struggle. the next couple 100,000, you're now at 7 to 8. You're still going to have a little bit of struggle. You'll start to make some income. Get to that $1 million, you're finally making somewhere around 325, 350, 400. And now we're happy. It's just going to take a long, long journey. If it's 30 new patients a month, it will be much, much faster getting 60 to 70. That depends on location. That depends on marketing. So that is a quick recap of the numbers, kind of big picture. And then certainly for this episode, I'd want to spend some time on some of the other specialties, because I think it's important that as you think about your colleagues in your space, you're all colleagues, you have different sets of circumstances. So just because one guy or gal does something this way or that way does not necessarily mean that perhaps that was the right way. A perio or GP or oral surgeon, they all have kind of different paths.
Yeah. And I think too, before we move on to talk about the specialties, I think that it's important to understand that when it makes sense is different for every single person, like you just mentioned. And we talk about the economics of a dental practice, and we start there because cash flow is always king. And if you individually have a story that allows you to have the slow build up and have the, now what is closer to $1 million loan for a startup, and have that flexibility, or you have a spouse that works and you're not relying on your income, I think that's fantastic. But you have to know your personal situation. You have to know and be realistic about what it could look like if it goes well, and what could this look like if it doesn't go well or takes longer than you anticipate. Because I think that stress and that anxiety of of being the sole breadwinner for your family, or kind of having everything riding on your shoulders, can be a lot. And so I think that's really important to kind of think about.
It is a really good point to have and to know what you need. And I agree that if you're a male GP and you're married to an oral surgeon and she's making $1 million a year, you've interviewed GPs in the market, you can't find anything, and you've got this $1 million income from the surgeon's spouse. I get it. We don't need your income. I get it to this couple in Dallas, they're working part-time. And so their stress is it's just not growing. They have income coming in working as general dentist at these other locations, but the stress is still, they thought it would take off much faster, and it didn't. And stress is real for people. I mean, when a real stress is when you wake up in the middle of the night and you can feel it in your chest, and it's typically as a parent, you will somehow feel this along the journey, and sometimes it's with a close family member. But the third thing I will tell you is it's finance. So if you're dealing with something super stressful in your life mentally, could be around family, but the stress thing, it is a real thing that will wake you up. And so anything I can do to encourage to reduce and minimize some of that stress that hits in the middle of the night on a financial decision, always seek the best team possible before you kind of go down these roads.
Absolutely. So let's dive into startups. Because I know that you think there are 3 specialties that are easier from a startup perspective. So let's start with those. I think, let me guess, is it pedo, surgery, endo, right?
100%.
Okay, walk through those and let's talk about each, or why you think they're easy.
I think on the pedo side, number one, there's a line out the door. It's just an underserved community nationwide. We can easily turn on the HMO side of things, certainly right out of the gate. PPO and maybe a small amount of fee-for-service patients will come in. But the simple thing is they're just high in demand. That's the number one. Number two, they do have, because they're high in demand, they do a startup, they have the ability to go work outside of the practice and to be compensated really well. Average associate pediatric dentist will make $325, $350. So reality is they work a couple of days, they can easily make $200,000 a year. So that's number one. So picking location for the pediatric dentist, using companies like the Dentographics or somebody like a group that really is thoughtful about location and has a good business plan. But even then, even a bad business plan for pedos, I still see crush it. So that's one that you're in charge. Pick your location. There's a few groups out there. I know Jameson Management works with some of the pedo starts. I think they do a really good job there. So as a consultant, that's something that you might want to think about. The other is
on pedo, quick, before
please.
You move on, You've said this in other episodes, so I think it's in case someone just listens to this. Pedos often underbuild from a space perspective, right? So like when we talk about a pedo startup because of the need, which could play into if you're worried about kind of how much loan to take out, this is probably the safer one to overbuild. I mean, is that fair to say? Overbuild, I mean like from a 4-op practice, not from a Taj Mahal.
I think it's important, going back to the economics part of when I started this, is in the end, we're trying to have a collection amount and then have a ratio with rent. That ratio I'm really trying to hit from a sweet spot is about 5, 6, maybe 7% rent. So let's say it this way. If I was able to achieve $1 million practice as a general dentist and my rent was $60,000 annually, that's a nice number to hit. So then you have to think about, of the $6,000, what type of space do I get? So the general dentist, maybe that is call it a 5-chair practice, maybe 4 chairs. I just want to get a very efficient rent rate for my space to my collections. For the pediatric dentist, there's no question that a single pediatric dentist is going to be able to do $1.5 million, $1.7 million by themselves. Okay. And typically they're going to need this kind of 5-chair, max 6-chair practice, and that's going to tap out for them. If this thing really blows up, then I need space to eventually bring that other associate in. And so, yeah, we might try to get a very efficient 8-chair practice and a pedo start. Now, it doesn't mean, 4,000 square feet. Now my rent is really high and now my ratio's off. I want something that perhaps is a tight 7-chair practice that I can get 4 to 5, open bay and 2 to 3 quiet rooms in there. And again, typically on pedo, I typically need a little bit of a waiting room for families. Yeah. So it's just something that economics are always a little bit different but you're right. I don't want a 4-chair pedo at all, ever. Yeah. Even my Northeast guys and gals that are up there have some of these smaller facilities, or even on the West Coast, like in San Francisco. I mean, I really need some space because, again, it's the same demand issue.
Yeah. All right. Surgeon,
same thing, super high in demand. I've never met a surgeon that is struggling. Oh, I just don't have any new patients. I've been doing this for 4 years now, and I haven't been able to cross $1 billion. I don't know that surgeon. Never met him. I've never met the pediatric dentist, same thing, that wasn't north of $1 million of collections after the 3rd year. And if it is, it's by choice. They're literally not trying to market and grow this. The other thing that's really cool about the surgeon is their clinical skill set, to where they are super high in demand. So they can easily go work for some all-on-4 clinic A, B, and C and do $25,000 mornings and get paid 30, 35, 40% of what they did as income. So even in this startup practice, if it's starting whatever a little slow for whatever reason, my backup plan is still, as a surgeon, getting a massive income. And that allows that surgeon to kind of remove that stress, as well as to hire the marketing coordinator, to have people that are going in marketing, setting up the study club, all those things that they need to really get that surgery practice off the ground. The only time I see the surgeons really struggle is when they build a building and it's too big and it's out of the gate. We've done some episodes on that. That's the ones I get a little anxious about. I still am a firm believer that leasing a space, if you're doing a complete startup, or if it's a build from a building standpoint, it's something that we can manage. Again, going back to, okay, what do you think as a surgeon you're going to be able to do? Let's just say $2.5 million. If you've got a $25,000 quote unquote rent rate because you just built some 6,000 square foot Taj Mahal and you're still 2, 3, 4 years and it's still a single doctor practice that never grew to the 2 doctor practice that you thought it, it's struggle.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'd rather build my perfect dream building after I'm working and I can't physically do anymore. I got another maybe doctor, another surgeon with me, a line out the door. We're stepping on each other's foot. I mean, it's a little bit of a train wreck, but we make so much money. We've got less than a 50% overhead. These are really good problems to have. And then perhaps I leverage all of this money I'm making and I go take that risk with that bigger building and perhaps even share that risk with my maybe associate or partner and going down those roads together just to mitigate risk.
Yeah. And an oral surgery startup is oftentimes the most expensive startup
I agree.
To start, right? So like your loan is bigger regardless of building size because of the equipment. And typically they are a larger space. So like there's just a little bit more expensive from a loan perspective.
Yeah, I think today, a 625 to 750 number for my GP, somewhere in the neighborhood of that number probably equivalent to my pediatric dentist startup. My surgeon, I would typically see that number
North of a
8,
million.
9,
Yeah.
even a million
I
for
would
a
say a
really
million.
nice,
And
maybe they're going
depending
a
on
little
where
bit
you
bigger.
are.
Yep. Maybe they're going 3,000 square foot, so my finish out cost is high. Great transition for the next one, which is the endo, and that's my least expensive startup. And so my endos, I really don't care about how beautiful it is. You can be in the back corner as long as there's a bunch of GPs. They're out front with their signage and they marketing and great and lots of new patients and they're growing and generating those root canals are being done. You can be in the back corner with 1,200 square feet, super low rent, no signage, no exposure. You've got everything you need in those 3 ops, and you're able to do, call it $1.4 million to $1.6 million, probably 5-6 canals a day. You have the least labor costs. You have least startup costs to borrow and finish out, least equipment costs. I've seen endos do a startup for as little as $250,000. I would say in general, if we're going to go all greatest finish out technology, maybe it's going to be a number 6 or 7. But again, that's going to be out of choice. I think it's one of those specialties that you don't need all the bells and whistles out of the gate. Technology is basically what I would say is obviously something you're not going to go cheap on, but least expensive for sure.
And I would say outside of like a pure proth practice, endo and oral surgery are 2 of the ones that we see the least of from a 100% acquisition. There's a lot of partnerships in that space, but from 100% acquisition, because it is purely referral in nature, there aren't as many of those and they are riskier. You know, it's harder to come into town without having any connections and buy 100% referral based practice and win over all those referrals. So we do see startups in these spaces more, sometimes price wise, they're very similar, but some people see those as less risky because they're going to be in the same boat regardless, right? They're going to have to win over all these referrals. We do see them slightly differently. Like clearly you're still buying patients and cash flow and those relationships. And if the senior doctor stays around, like the goodwill can hang around. So there are definitely ways to do it and do it well. But I think we do see the least amount of 100% acquisitions in those spaces.
Yeah, on the surgeons, interesting. I feel that the surgeon's DNA is probably the most complicated of all the dental specialties. I don't know how to say that, but they are just wired differently. And I do think they're pretty strong opinionated. And I think that they're analyzing, just like as you mentioned, maybe this practice for sell, maybe they're analyzing that price, maybe they're analyzing these partners and just saying, you know what? I'm going to do this on my own.
Yep.
And going back to that confidence, because they know that they could have side income and hustles at this independent contractor or this other practice to basically, I'm going to do this on my own. I want it laid out this way. I want my equipment laid out this way. Here's my marketing. Here's my brand. I don't want to be a part of you.
Yep.
And so I totally agree that you're just going to see kind of different mindset and approach to this. And one more thing in the endo before we move on to the other specialty, same thing. They got a job anywhere.
Yep.
They can go work, do a root canal in a matter of minutes for this $1,200, $1,500 case, and 5, 6, 7, 8 of them, you know, if they're really good and busy, and line up a $10,000 day and make $4,000. And so that allows them to make this decision on the startup so much more easier.
All right, next tier, like a little harder, perio and proth.
Definitely perio and pros, they give me some anxiety. The perio is obviously such a referral-based business. I'm not saying that you can't do it and it won't work well. I don't know if I talked about this in the episode in the past or just in lecture, but a great example and just unbelievable, I'm just going to say it, badass. This girl was in Houston and she tried to go to a certain pocket. There was like 6 or 7 periodontists in the area. And she wanted to be in this northern corridor. And all of them said, we don't need you. We don't need you. We don't need you. And she said, okay. And so she did a startup. And what she did is she did an amazing job marketing. And so she marketed to all patients. They didn't market it to just GPs. She marketed to all patients. And then she got into the referral base and got with the GPs that were referring to the perio. She's female. The other males, obviously 5 or 6 of them, if I recall. Then she got in with the hygienist. She built an amazing brand. And she took off like overnight. But what she was doing is getting hundreds and hundreds of leads and then sending those over to the GP if it was truly a GP qualifier. But she was actually marketing to the patients and sending the GP or saying, these are procedures I can do as a periodontist. Let's get you to the GP, but here's what we're going to do for you as a periodontist. So she just thought differently. And it was really, really cool story. She ended up hiring a GP as an associate. Great. Is everyone like that? No. I would say that she was really good on kind of thinking differently, kind of out of the box. The reality is it's a referral-based business, and reality is you got to build a relationship and trust with those GPs. So if you go to a high-demand area and these GPs are just begging you to be there, then sure, it's going to be much easier compared to like a Frisco, Texas, or Plano, Texas, where we are, Highland Park. These are areas that we've got dental schools and residency programs. Everyone wants to be here. Much, much more competitive area on the referral-based side of things. The same with pros. It is very similar to perio. It's referral-based, huge cases. These are not just a gum graft or some type of one-off procedure the periodontist is doing. These are really big cases that the pros is trying to build relationships with. And so these $25,000, $50,000 cases, they don't all come at once. You're building relationships with the GP, you're working with them and, seeing this certain patient before they finally pull the trigger, depending on what stage it's at before you get this type of high income. So it's a little bit of a grind. And that's why you'll see a lot more partnerships in the perio and some of these spaces like this and the pros where they're hesitant. And so of those two, I would say pedo, OMS, and endo are my easiest, least risk. Next risk would be the perio and pros. And it's mainly because of the referral-based process. Again, got some side income, some side hustle. I make all this money, low student debt, low home debt. We can afford to do it. I'm frustrated. Then sure, we make those decisions financially.
And then last but not least, the one that always has to be different.
Yes.
Are orthos.
Yeah, I'm seeing more and more ortho. I would tell you back in 2019, I will tell you that I was seeing less startups. And because there were a lot more practices that were for sale, there's a saturated market today where the number of buyers that are coming out, there's just not enough practices that are for sale. And so we're seeing more and more orthos that have that experience, but not quite finding these practices because of practices on the ortho side, either selling to a DSO or practices that honestly, they just get listed and there's tens of buyers and they're not the one that gets picked. The challenge with the ortho is that it's heavy on the marketing side up front to get the new patient. So you're still spending call it $700,000 for a startup. You're still carrying the 6, 7, many, especially if you went to a private orthodontic residency program, you could be carrying as much as 7, 8, 900, even $1 million of dental school and residency debt as an orthodontist. So your hesitation with carrying another 7, hesitation with signing on a lease, it's a big task. So I getting anxious about it. And then some of those anxieties go away when I see something where it's next door to a pediatric dentist. I see something where, again, that's spousal income. I see something where they don't have perhaps the dental school debt. I see something where they've got a consultant like a Jill Allen that's guiding them through this process. So my anxiety can go away, but for the most part, if I add those factors in between their student debt, between the competition that's out there, my marketing spend, I have to go out there that's not known. So I don't have a guarantee. It's what marketing is. There's not a guarantee you're going to get a patient from it. Let's assume you do get the patient that calls in. They finally show up, parent comes in, and it's a 5-year-old, and you're trying to sell a case. They just don't have 6-year-old teeth, to put the bands on. So it's therefore, sure, we got a patient, but now we're in observation. These are employee costs. These are fixed costs, all associated with seeing a 5-year-old without the 6-year-old teeth. Over time, it's a beautiful thing to get this thing off the ground. It's great. This, again, is going to come back down to marketing, number of patients that we get in, what gets converted. The biggest thing I would say on the ortho is know your market, do your best to be next to a pediatric dentist, and go in this with a true business plan, invest in the marketing, consulting side of things. And if you can, have some spousal income, a really good kind of $2,000 per diem kind of job on the side, kind of as we build this project. And again, let's don't build too big. Maybe we're trying to limit from a space standpoint to 2,200 square foot or less, just so I can keep my costs down.
Yeah. And I think too, it feels as though the ortho can typically do the most from a production standpoint as like a single provider. And so you're competing with individual practices where they kind of can keep up with the volume and the general dentists who are doing the ortho work in-house. And so you're kind of really having to compete with like almost everyone in your space. And then you have the long lead times of the patient. So I think those two things just make it where it takes longer to kind of get your feet under you because of that.
Well, it goes back to the economics, right? This first 500 of collections. You got to remember in orthodontics, we're seeing production. I finally get this $5,000 case, $6,000 case accepted, but your production's great at 6,000, but you only collected maybe 1,000. So my collections are always trailing. So even if my production has an amazing year or 18 months or 24 months, I'm still waiting for collections. Yeah. And so again, that's not how the rent works. You can't just tell the rent in their bank, hey, I've got a great production. It's going to catch up. Just hold off on that bill. I'll pay you here in a bit. It's not exactly the way it works.
It's true. And I think too, and this kind of goes into our final topic, and you've said it multiple times, but really in order to do a startup well, you have to have a good team. You have to do your homework. You have to do the demographics of the patient base and of the existing providers and that competition. And if you dream of setting up a fee-for-service practice, does the patient base exist that will spend fee-for-service rates? Or do you need to be in network with a certain insurance company? The build out, the vendors that you hire to do that, what supplier am I, all of that legwork helps make sure that you're setting up the right space. And then there's someone who's going to have to help you set it up from a business perspective, the Kane Waters, the elites, a consultant, right? There's a ton of really specific consultants out there that only work with specialties, but there's also just a lot of consultants out there. And like you mentioned earlier, the wrong consultant could set you up for failure if you just blindly follow whatever they say. So I think getting the right team together that has the right experience, checking references, just like you do with any other type of person you're going to hire, really, really important.
Yeah, I think on that front too, like on the vendor side, that's where Kane Waters would come in. We'd set up dental specific chart of accounts with each one of these specialties. Let's get some good projections that we'd have for the practice. You mentioned working with Elite. That's our group purchasing organization that one of the vendors, Benco, they'll fly you in to one of their meetings 3-4 times a year they host, fly you in, spend some time with you at their showroom, going over just the layout, going over, some early architecture, going over equipment purchases. So just those early vendors that we want to here at NDP and Kane Waters to be able to kind of guide you and make sure you've got all the right pieces and team associated so that we can get you to a successful place and serve you with one of these service lines that are most appropriate for you.
Yeah. And I think, if you're listening and this is something that you either feel like you have to do because where you want to ultimately land just doesn't have the right opportunity, or something you just are driven to do because you're built like that and you just want to build something, I think you have to kind of do what we've said today, which is take a hard look at yourself and your plan and where you are financially, and just really kind of make sure that you are setting yourself up for success as you go forward and not just relying on the story of someone you heard about who was successful by doing X, Y, or Z, because what works in one market doesn't work in another, works in one specialty doesn't work in another. So really just being smart about it. So thank you for listening. That's all we have for today. Reminder, we have the other episodes on startup. So 15, 63, 74, and 108. And so feel free to listen to those if you have questions. We are always here as a resource. And as always, make sure to share the transition love with those who may not know of us yet, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time.
Thanks, team.